Welcome to the Achieve Results Now podcast, the podcast that gives you immediate actions you can take to start seeing life-shifting results now. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Achieve Results Now podcast. This is Mark Cardone.
And Theron Feidt.
We are here. This is it. Pillar 7 of the Achieve Results Now leadership blueprint. I'm kind of sad. I really enjoyed doing these.
That's been great.
Yeah. So we've talked about integrity. We've talked about vision. We've talked about empathy, decisiveness, resilience, and we just recorded an amazing podcast on accountability. So feel free to go back and listen to those pillars that we've already done. Today, we're talking about one of the ones that a lot of people struggle with, but what's probably I wouldn't say the most important, but one of the most important pillars, which is communication.
Yes. Yeah. And it's about effective communication. It's not about what you think you said. It's not about, well, I thought I said it correctly or my tone was fine. It's about how they heard it. And that can be very tricky because everybody's different. How you communicate with your whole team cannot be the same. And that can be tricky when you're doing, let's say, a meeting of 20 different people. How you communicate in that meeting has to be very different than how you communicate with a group of 5 or a one-on-one, and it's just like teaching martial arts, teaching kids, teaching juniors, teaching what we call little dragons, which is the preschool. All of that has to be different. The principles should be the same in all 3 groups, but how you come across needs to be different, or it's either going to be over their head, or for the adults, you're going to be like, why are you talking to me like I'm a 4-year-old, and none of that's good. So the communication needs to be, you need to adjust your communication. You need to make sure that you are able to ebb and flow depending on the audience you have in front of you.
And to the people listening to this who have already kind of tuned out and said, well, I'm a great communicator, I don't need this. Not only do you need this, but you need to go back and listen to the other 6, immediately, because really growing communication skills is something you always get better at. I'm constantly trying to get better at communicating. I know you are. And most of the leaders I know, this is always the thing they're working on. How do I communicate better with my team? How do I communicate better with my spouse? All of those things, so I think this is super important. And we have 3 great action steps to break it down and to make it easy. Let's start with number 1, which is mastering the clarity filter. Right? Clarity is so much of communication. Confusion is the enemy of execution. I love that quote. As a leader, our job isn't really to sound smart. It's important that we are smart.
Sure.
But, you can sound smart all you want, but if people don't understand what you're saying, it doesn't work. So I think, one of the things we like to implement is what we're going to call the 3rd grade test. Do you even have the ability to explain something complex to a 3rd grader? And I think this is a great exercise for people. Take your job, explain what you do for a living to a 3rd grader, because the number of people I meet that are starting a business and I ask what they do and they say something, and I as a 40 something year old adult have no idea what they do by the time they're done telling me. This is so important. The 3rd grade test. Can you explain it to a 3rd grader?
Well, part of that, before I go on to the next part of this, is I've heard of definition of brilliance, or definition, somebody that's super smart is the ability to take something complex and bring it down to a simple level, and to explain it to a 3rd grader, 5th grader, whatever, but explain it to somebody young or somebody that isn't super smart, and that might not sound nice, but that's just the way it is, because that's where you're going to be most effective and reach the masses. Okay. Right.
I'll tell you something that doesn't sound nice is the new business owners I meet who have the longest explanation for what they do are the definition of broke and struggling.
Yes.
So really, this is what I see in the real world. So this is important. 3rd grader, that brilliance definition, boil it down. I do this. Easy, right?
Yep. Now, the other part of this is the bottom line up front. So when you're in a meeting, an email, whatever, and this is tough to do, because we all like to set things up and make sure things are good. But within the first paragraph of your email or within the first 10 to 20 seconds of a meeting, this is what's important. This is the bottom line. So try to get rid of the fluff, and especially in a meeting, especially in a business set. S- um, you just want to make sure that you're getting right to it, because otherwise people are like, okay, yep, I'm ready. Yep, I've heard this all before. But you get right to the bottom line, and then you can discuss other things. That just sets the tone of the meeting much better.
Yeah, and to make sure you're clear and that people understand, I think it's good to just check for understanding, you know. And I think one of the mistakes in communication people make, right, is they say, "Okay, do you understand?" You know, like that's literally the feedback they look for. Like, hey, we
Yep.
had this conversation. Do you understand?
Right.
And they say yes. And the problem with that is, do you understand? They understand what they think you said. You know what I mean? So sometimes a better way to do this when we're checking for understanding is saying, okay, you know, now that we've had the conversation, what's your first step? What's your first
Mhm.
two steps? This works great with teams. You know, I
Right.
like this is something that works great with people I manage at the office is instead of
Hmm.
just telling them what I think they should do, finishing with, okay, now that we've gone through that, like what's your action step for the week? What are we going to do to start making progress? And this works across the board to make sure people, because they may give you they may give you something that is completely a step in the wrong direction,
Right.
and
Yep.
that just helps you understand that you didn't communicate it clearly and you need to go through it again.
Yep. So action step number two is practice active empathetic listening. So actively practice this. Okay. And the empathetic listening is all about empathy, which is understanding. So understanding what the person is talking about. Communication is a two-way street. Now, as a leader, sometimes you have to just say, "Hey, this is what I need to do. Here are the instructions. Get it done." In a class, if we have a class of 40 kids and we need things done, we don't need to discuss what needs to be done. Just do what I tell you to do and do it. Afterwards, we can talk about it. So there's certain times you're just gonna just tell them this is what needs to be done because it's time sensitive. You're not going to do a huddle and have 7 and 8 year olds running around and being crazy with you, right? So it depends on the situation, but in a regular situation is the wait rule. Okay, so before you interrupt when somebody's talking, just wait 2 or 3 seconds, see what they say. Pause before you speak. That gives you time to think about what they said, and also you can filter out anything that you need to say. Instead of when somebody's talking to you, you're listening for you to just respond back or just to say something back. You can. It's just a better communication when you wait. It just gives them a little chance to say, "Oh, that he's really listening to me."
It's funny when this is something that I've always worked on, um, not waiting to talk. Like listening is not waiting to talk.
Right.
And I think listening is such a big part of communication, right? Where, we have to sit, let people finish. But another thing we have to listen. So, we should be listening to the words they're saying and kind of processing it. But the other thing we should really be listening to is what they're not saying and the subtext, you
Hmm.
know, looking at their face, looking at their shoulders. We
Right.
say, was is it 56% of language or 56% of communication is body language? I think it's 56 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um,
55, 56,
yeah,
something like that.
is body language, so watching people when they talk, when people get excited, they stand up, they breathe deeper, you see their face light up. When people are concerned or confused, their shoulders droop,
Hmm.
they breathe more shallow. But looking at that subtext, maybe if people aren't making eye contact with you when they're telling
Right.
you something, looking at that and trying to mesh that with listening to the words they're saying. Listening is such a big part of communication. This is so important.
And the last part of this, and this is what I use all the time, and you know this,
Yeah.
is questions over statements. So when you're talking with somebody, you want feedback. If you can, through your line of questions, get them to answer what you're looking for and get them to say what they need to do without you telling them what to do, they're going to remember that much better. But also they're going to take ownership in that because they actually verbalize what they need to do. You have to get good at questioning, and it can't seem like you're interrogating them. It has to be a conversation, and it has to be a little back and forth. but I do this all the time in feedback. I could give my students feedback on how they did the performance and be done in a minute. Hey, Mark, you need to work on this. You need to work on this. You need to work on that. Go. I could do that, or I could say, so how'd you feel in class? How do you feel? What do you think about your stances? How about your kicks? Anything you can do to improve your kicks? Anything you're doing to improve your kicks? And on and on. And and that just makes a big difference. Now it's a conversation back and forth, which instead of just a one-way street. So if you don't use questions, try that a little more often. Just kind of slip them in there within your statements.
Yeah,
I think you're gonna find that they work very well.
100%. And then action item three, which I love, and I have like great pieces to this, but it's about building radical candor. It's about building a culture, and I love that I've built a family that does this.
Yeah.
And I work on this in my workplace, but it's about having that culture where people are comfortable to speak
Hmm.
and speak freely, right? Not swear at each other, not be mean to each other and things like that. But we have to respect each other, but where we're free to say what we want to say, and
Hmm.
I love talking about the first part of this, which is, when we have things that are tough, things that are uncomfortable, maybe, when we feel let down or something goes wrong, having those conversations quickly. You
Hmm.
know, difficult conversations should always be had quickly. We love letting them sit. We love letting them fester, and we hate feeling like we're doing that for a long period of time, but we do it
Right.
anyway. I don't know
Hmm.
why. But being able to address things quickly within 24 hours is a really important part of communication.
The next part of this is the safe to fail. Make sure your team knows that you want bad news,
Hmm.
right? If there's something bad, if you lost a customer, lost a student, project failed, whatever,
Yeah,
um, make sure that it's okay. And it's about you as the leader. What's your reaction for that? Do you automatically blame them when they come in? Well, they're going to stop telling you. They're going to keep things from you. They're going to hide things from you. Or are you like, okay, all right, that's fine. That what can we do to fix it? Is there anything we do to fix it? How can we get better? Now, this can be tough because let's say it's their fault that it failed, then obviously it's a little tougher. But at the very least, get it where just in general bad news, you're not gonna kill the messenger, as they say.
yeah,
You want to be a leader that it's okay that the bad news comes to you because you need to have 360-degree vision of the good and the bad to make
right.
a great decision. If it's only good things and your team is only telling you things you want to hear, there's a huge blind spot
Yeah.
and your decisions aren't going to be as effective because you didn't set it up properly to take the bad news. You overreacted. You're being childish. You're whatever as the leader instead of accepting that bad things are going to happen, bad news is going to happen, people are going to let you down, but how you respond from that is going to make a huge difference in the culture that you're creating.
And I think the best response to that is being direct but kind.
Yeah.
I think it's about, not criticizing the person. It's
Right.
about criticizing the process,
Right.
asking questions about how we can do this better. But I think we get into that that loop of saying like, oh, well, this person's lazy, or this person doesn't know what they're doing, or because that's a much easier answer as a leader, especially when you're busy, than having to look yourself in the mirror and say, well, I didn't give proper directive, or I didn't
Hmm.
do these other things that we just talked about,
Right.
where I'm looking for what are those first steps and doing all the things that I should do. And this is why I tell people, when you think you're good at communication and then you listen to a podcast like this and you go, wow, that's a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah.
Right. Like it is. And it's hard to be good at all of it.
Right.
It's funny talking about radical candor. I think about something I learned from you way back when I was young, like when I first started working for you. And it was about loyalty and support,
Hmm.
and it was about how disagreeing is not a lack of support or a lack of
Right.
loyalty. And I think, building a culture where you can say something like I can say, hey, we're going to do this. The team's comfortable saying, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I
Right.
feel that. And then being able to, kind of communicate with them and unify because they might be right. We want
Yeah.
ideas, we want feedback,
Yeah.
but having that people feel comfortable to have that open feedback, gives them more power so that when you make a direction, we're all moving that way. That's where the
Right.
support comes in, right? So the
Yeah.
direct, it's not necessarily like my idea is the best one and we need to
Yeah.
do it. It's this is my idea. Let's talk about it. And then once we decide collectively as a team, as a family, etc., now we're unified in approach, right?
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think being direct but kind and really giving people that space to communicate is super important in
Yeah.
communication.
For sure. For sure. Okay. Let's review. So action step number one is master the clarity filter. So part of that is the third grade test of can you bring what you need down to the third grade level or the fifth grade level at a lower level? Can you take what's complicated and make it simple? Along with that is the bottom line. Right, bottom line up front. So in a meeting, in an email, this is what I'm going for. This is what we need to work on. That also sets the tone much better for the meeting or the email. And then also the last part of this is check for understanding. So are you clear? Does asking does that make sense to you? Are there any questions? Are there that all helps clarify things, and you're checking the understanding of what you think you said to make sure it was delivered properly.
Yep. Action item number two, active empathetic listening. The worst class I ever took in active listening basically just taught us to nod and smile while people were talking. That's part of it, though. We need to make sure that we are giving people that golden silence, where we're letting them finish their conversation and we're listening. Like we're actively listening. We're not only listening to the words, but we're listening to the subtext. We're listening to their body language. And then we're really using questions more than the statements. We're asking them to clarify things like, what is the bottleneck? How does this make you feel? Oh, that sounds tough. Tell me more about
Mhm.
that. Right. But using those questions to extend the conversation.
And action step number three is build radical candor culture. And this is all about building culture as a leader. That's part of your job. And the communication is part of that. So the 24-hour feedback window. So if there's a difficult conversation that you need to do, make sure that you get to it. Now, that doesn't mean that you react right away. I think there needs to be, I like to sleep on things. So that'd be, a 12-hour turnaround. Let it sink in and then I talk about it. You don't want to let it go more than a day. The second part is it's okay to give you bad news. You as a leader, you want bad news just as much as you want good news. You want both. That way, you can make a better decision. And your response to somebody giving you bad news is going to make a difference of whether they're going to continue to give you bad news and tell you the truth or just what you want to hear. And then the last part of that is being direct but kind.
Yeah.
A lot of people are nice, but they're not kind.
Yeah.
And being kind is about being supportive, what's best for the team. It's not about criticizing other people. It's about helping them get better. Because if you tell them as their leader and they're improving, then as they go, they're growing and improving either in their next job or in your own company. And it's a win-win all the way around.
And I think, this is important to cap with is that, we've gone through a lot of pillars of leadership, and you can have great vision, you can have great integrity, your heart can be full of empathy, right? But if
Mhm.
you can't communicate clearly, you're really missing the impact.
Right.
You're really missing the impact. So learning how to communicate clearly, listen to this podcast twice, share it with somebody who you think would benefit from it. Make sure you go back and listen to the other pillars. And we are coming up on episode 500 pretty soon. I'm super excited about that.
Yeah. It's gonna be
So make
awesome.
sure you subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Hop over to our website at www.achieveresultsnow.com to get your free copy of our book, Ignite Results, 4 specific daily actions to help you achieve results now. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Achieve Results Now. Thanks for listening, commenting, and subscribing. Now get out there and achieve results now.